Welcome to JFK and the Enduring Secret. I'm your host, Jeff Crudell. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is episode 72. You know, I'm old enough now, and I've seen enough in life already to know that evil hides amongst the good. That's why it really does take a trained eye to spot it. All of us get to see what evil looks like in one or more of its infinite forms. And, depending upon our life's circumstance, some of us have seen more evil than others, more than our fair share on a daily basis. So quite naturally, some of us are better at spotting it. But you have to start with the idea that it does exist, and just because the people around you and your life, the folks that you live with and among, are mostly in the good, well, that does not preclude evil from presenting itself right in your own backyard. And certainly we see it every day, sometimes from afar on television or elsewhere in the media, and sometimes we get to actually see it, up close and personal. On an individual basis, your own willingness to develop a trained eye and a trained mind are almost always directly related to the dangers that you have come upon in life, the dangers that resulted from evil being nearby, and you not being able to recognize the presence of that evil before it struck in that certain circumstance. As humans, we learn from our experiences, and the upfront and personal experiences are the ones with the most impact. So as a juror, in this case, each of you that is listening is going to evaluate and interpret what you are hearing in different ways, and one of the things that affects that evaluation is how much evil that you personally have seen in your lifetime, and how receptive you are first to its basic existence. I saw an interesting video a couple of nights ago where the actor Matthew McConaughey was giving a commencement speech. He said something that struck me, and actually something that I did not warm up to right at that moment. Right at that moment, I just couldn't truly understand the nuances of it until after the commencement exercise was over. He said that, among many, one word in the English language should be abolished. That is the word unbelievable. He said we should never witness something and then describe it as unbelievable. If we witnessed it, it surely happened. It surely is believable. And it may be described as fantastic or extraordinary or something of the like, but it should not be characterized as unbelievable. This truly is applicable to evil, too, just as applicable to evil as it is to things good. And that goes to the core question of whether you believe in evil, because if you do, then you can certainly learn to identify it. There is a saying that I just love to repeat all the time in my roles in business. It goes like this: the eye is blind to what the mind cannot see. I've said that before, I think, on this podcast. I don't know who first said that, but I think it's a wonderful rendition of the problem that we face every day in assessing what the truth is about a given circumstance, whatever circumstance you might be assessing. So why am I telling you this as the prologue to this particular episode? We are 8 episodes in on the Autopsy series and beginning episode 9. For me, I am beginning to feel like we have entered a haunted house. I am beginning to feel like there is evil lurking. And without a trained eye, some of us might miss it completely. Thus, the reason for the wander. And in the world of medico-legal matters, the medical record itself is sacrosanct. I've spent 40 years or so in and around the hospital business. I know a thing or two about it. There is a saying in the medical profession, and it goes like this: if it is not documented in the medical record, it has not been done. And that saying, well, it's a way of emphasizing to every clinical person that each relevant activity, each relevant procedure, each relevant observation about a patient in a healthcare circumstance needs to be documented in the medical record. And in a perfect world, everyone involved, if they are earnestly inclined, if they are acting in earnest, gets that perfectly right. In the case of living patients, this is considered extremely important to achieving a positive outcome for a patient, not to mention the legal requirements around it. In the case of an autopsy, it is critical in order to prove or disprove what really happened. That is, what are the true facts around how this person really died? In the JFK case, there is such a mountain of evidence that is available, we often assume that everything relevant is contained within the body of evidence that is available for us to readily see. There are a few fools like myself who sometimes believe that if you keep combing through the existing evidence long enough, you'll find the true answer. What many of us have come to learn is that there was just enough evidence, just a big enough mountain of it, to create incredible inconsistencies when microanalyzed. Inconsistencies abound, and some of which are natural in a criminal case, but some of which are clearly clues to discovering what really happened. But still, what remains undocumented or lost or destroyed or locked up somewhere still is likely to be the real key to eventually learning what actually happened. There is still hope for that, you know. There really is. That is why some very dedicated lawyers and researchers are still on the trail of the assassins. The autopsy is especially mysterious. There were things said and done that night that were undocumented in the official record. Indeed, there were things that happened that night that resulted in outright lying that took place. Again, the last 2 or 3 episodes of the podcast should give you some sense of that. Our individual penchant for spotting evil, not our individual belief in any particular conspiracy theory, is what will allow you to make a better assessment of that, a better objective assessment. What has made the unraveling of this mystery around the autopsy even more difficult are the secrecy restrictions that were placed on everyone present that night. The good in me wants to believe that, well, there was some very good and rational reason for that, perhaps just to be in good taste, and to ensure that a quote or a picture or a drawing did not end up on the front page of the National Enquirer. That, to me, was a legitimate concern, even in that day and age. But the side of me that has become better trained to spot evil when it's hiding amongst good is now saying, at about 8 episodes in on the autopsy series, that there must have been more that we simply don't know about. You know, what was not documented was not done. And combine that with an oath of secrecy that if you did see something, you couldn't talk about it or disclose it, well then, one really must acquire some sort of skepticism that begins to bend toward the nefarious. When bad things happen in a medico-legal circumstance, lawsuits are filed and depositions are taken, and we begin to unravel the question of what really happened in that given circumstance, listening directly to the people who were there and listening closely to determine whether evil was at work or not. Whether something happened that was not documented in the record, whether there were more facts that need to be known and evaluated in order to determine the truth. Today's episode is about just that. We begin to listen to one more of those witnesses, Gerald Custer, who was present at the autopsy, and we begin to get a glimpse of things that were unheard of and unstated for a good long time after the assassination. And we begin to understand that what the public may have presumed at the time, that there was a seemingly good and well-intentioned circumstance that night at Bethesda, was not quite right. Because it was an event that might also have become entangled with some evil that night. I don't think the whole night was full of evil, but it doesn't take that much of a touch for evil to find success. If you believe that this witness, Gerald Custer, has trained eyes to spot evil on that night, and that he himself was acting in an honest way, well then his testimony in this episode should be believable. But that really is for you to decide after you listen to it. What you'll hear is sworn testimony, and I do think that does make a difference. Sworn testimony in the case of Gerald Custer. Custer's testimony is extensive, and it's quite interesting and quite colorful. In total, it's almost 3.5 hours long, unedited. So I have spent some time editing out parts that don't have much relevance to our discussion in order to keep it to a manageable size for you as a listener. But this is an important testimony to listen to for you. It's firsthand that night, and it's powerful. You can listen to the whole thing at our website at www.podcastjfk.com under episode 72. Even so, the edited testimony is long enough that it requires a breakup into multiple shorter episodes in order to bring it to you. So you will hear from Custer starting in this episode 72 and then continuing over multiple episodes. And when we are done with Custer, we will then pivot to his commanding officer, his boss, Dr. John Ebersol, who was also present and part of the autopsy that night. Not that it's a head fake, but the first few minutes of the narrative are actually John Stringer. John Stringer was the autopsy photographer. The element of secrecy surrounding the autopsy was all-encompassing, and I felt like he made one of the most powerful statements about that secrecy at the outset of his own testimony. So we've included that comment at the start of this episode narrative. And before we get started with the narrative itself, I do want to reiterate something that I have said before on the podcast. It is true that there was some natural pressure to complete the autopsy quickly, and that may or may not have been directly applied by the forces of evil in the room that night. That part could have simply been misguided goodness, perhaps concerns for Jackie's and Robert's personal desires. Misguided goodness that was probably utilized rather conveniently by the evil in the room. Those two dynamics became strange allies that night. With all of this in mind, it's time to get to the episode itself now. I guess I should say the series of Gerald Custer episodes. I'll stop beating around the bush, but do me one favor. Please do try and listen with your best, in this case, your best trained ear and trained mind. So, without further ado, let's listen to episode 72 of JFK, The Enduring Secret.
If you will, sir, raise your right hand and be sworn. You solemnly swear to tell the truth in this matter, so help you God. I do. Thank you. Would you state your name for the record, please? John Stringer. Mr. Stringer, have you ever had your deposition taken before?
I have not.
There will be the tape recording that is being made of the deposition will be kept in the archives, as well as the copy of the transcript before your changes and the copy of the transcript. Mr. Stringer, you are under oath, and unlike in the telephone conversation that you and I had earlier, federal law pertaining to perjury would apply here, and so we ask that you give your best and most honest recollection to the extent that you can. If you don't recall, then you should say that you don't recall, but it's very important that we get as best recollection as we can from you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mr. Stringer, were you present at any time during the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Yes, I was.
What was your role generally at the autopsy?
I took photographs of the body.
Is there any reason today that you would be unable to answer the questions that I'm going to ask you honestly, fully, and accurately?
No reasons.
Were you ever previously under any kind of order or restraint from being able to talk about the autopsy?
Yes, I was.
Can you explain very briefly what the nature of the order was or the circumstances that put you under the order?
Well, I think it was the morning after the autopsy. We were gathered into the commanding officer's office of the Naval Medical School, who threw the fear of God into everyone. And he had a paper that we all had to sign that we would not talk to anyone about what had happened on that particular night.
Do you remember the name of the person who gave you the order?
John Stover.
Did he say why you were being put under an order not to discuss the autopsy?
Not as far as I can recall. He just said that it was a very important thing that we were not to speak to anyone about it.
Did he use the term secret or top secret in terms of the substance of what had happened at the autopsy?
I think he did.
Which term did he use?
I remember a secret, whether it was a top secret or not. I don't know.
Did Captain Stover say anything about orders coming from the White House?
I think he said it was orders from the Surgeon General.
Mr. Stringer, have you ever had a security clearance?
Yes, I have.
Did you have a security clearance at the time of the autopsy?
Yes, I did.
When is the last time, as best you recall, that you had your security clearance?
Oh, I don't remember. It was on my card, what I was cleared for. I know I had it when I went to Vietnam.
When was that?
It was in 68 or something, I think.
Did you ever have access to classified information?
Yes.
What was the highest level of security clearance that you had?
I think it was a top secret.
Switch the topic a little bit. Mr. Stringer, do you have any records in your possession that relate to the autopsy of President Kennedy?
No, I do not. I had a copy of that thing that I had to sign at one time, but I don't know where it is now.
When you're referring to the thing that you signed, do you mean an order from Captain Stover?
Yes, from Captain Stover.
As far as you know, you don't have a copy of that any longer?
I had someone send me some copies of the pictures, which I sent back.
Do you remember who it was who sent you a copy of the pictures?
Livingstone.
Is it Harry Livingstone? Is this?
They were in black and white.
Mr. Stringer, have you spoken to anyone about the fact that you would be having your deposition taken today?
Only my wife.
Would it be fair then to say that you didn't speak to anyone other than your wife about the substance of the deposition or anything about the autopsy?
That's correct.
Have you ever received any instructions from anyone affiliated with the United States government about statements that you should or should not make regarding the autopsy, other than the order not to discuss the autopsy?
No. I was at one time, I was told that I could talk to a Dr. Latimer when I was under that order.
Is that L-A-T-T?
I-M-E-R, I think it's Latimer.
You just heard a small clip from the testimony of John Stringer, testimony that was taken in 1992 by the Assassination Records Review Board, some 29 years after the autopsy itself took place. John Stringer is the photographer of record at the autopsy of President Kennedy, and he also took pictures at a supplementary brain exam days later. He was assisted by Floyd Reeby, who was a student of his. Stringer was never interviewed by the Warren Commission, and his first brief investigation interview took place under the guise of the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978. That HSCA interview was among those materials apparently not made available to the HSCA's medical panel. At one point, he made extensive comments to author and researcher David Lifton. There is much more to tell about the autopsy photographs and the photographic evidence and the testimony of both John Stringer and Floyd Reeby. but this clip was meant to succinctly re-emphasize the oath of secrecy that everyone that night had come under regarding the autopsy. We'll get back to the details about the autopsy photographs soon enough, after we finish the discussions about the radiology results. In complete disclosure, these are excerpts out of the first 5 or so minutes of his deposition that I have pieced together in order to give you a good sense of the secrecy order that they were all under. You can listen to the entire audio clip unedited at Mary Farrell or at the website www.history-matters.com. And as I said, we'll get back to details about the autopsy photographs soon enough. The secrecy orders, as Stringer stated, were executed for the most part on the day after the autopsy, although there was discussion, at least with some of the attendees, on the night before. Most of the individuals that witnessed the autopsy executed a standard secrecy order in writing, and I'll read what John Stringer executed in just a moment. The secrecy order that both Humes and Boswell executed as well are essentially similar, and I believe the same is true for Fink. You heard Stringer describe it. They put the fear of God into everyone that was there that night, and they referred to it as a secret. And in some cases, under threat of court-martial, the entire group was ordered not to talk about anything related to the autopsy, and that included talking amongst each other, although the wording as such for that is not explicitly stated in the secrecy order, but certainly implied by the phrase prohibiting discussion with anyone. If you'd like to see a copy of the actual secrecy order that Stringer executed as well as both Humes and Boswell, go to our website at www.podcastjfk.com and check out the links under episode 72. The letter is on a single sheet of paper. It's dated the 26th of November, 1963. It's from Commanding Officer, U.S. Naval Medical School, to Mr. John Thomas Stringer, Jr., GS-11. Item number 1. You are reminded that you are under verbal orders of the Surgeon General, United States Navy, to discuss with no one events connected with your official duties on the evening of 22nd November through 23rd November, 1963. This letter constitutes official notification and reiteration of these verbal orders. You are warned that infraction of these orders may subject you to disciplinary action pursuant to applicable laws, regulations, and instructions. Signed, J.H. Stover, Jr. There is a first endorsement, which is essentially from John Stringer to the commanding officer of the U.S. Naval Medical School. Item number 1, above orders received this date. Item number 2, I have read and fully understand them and am aware of the disciplinary actions possible in the event that I disobey these orders. Signed, John Thomas Stringer, 27th of November, 1963. As I said, there is plenty to tell about the photographic evidence, but that's not what we're going to cover today. Instead, we're going to start with the work that was done by the radiology team. That team consisted of Commander John Ebersol and an X-ray technician who reported to Ebersol named Gerald Custer. You'll hear from Ebersol, but first we're going to give the floor to Gerald Custer. Custer is a colorful character, clearly with technical expertise, and he plays into the narrative of the autopsy in a number of different ways. But for now, we are starting straight up with Gerald Custer's sworn testimony taken in 1997 for the Assassination Records Review Board. On October 28, 1997, Gerald Custer provided a deposition to the ARRB. Luckily for us, it was one of the handful of depositions where the audio was also recorded. That is a real treat in this case. At least I think so, and I hope you will too.
If you would, sir, please raise your right hand and be sworn. You solemnly swear to tell the truth in this matter, so help you God. I do. Thank you. Could you state your full name for the record, please?
My name is Gerald, Jerrol, Francis, Francis, Custer, Custer.
Mr. Custer, we are here pursuant to the authority granted by Congress to the Assassination Records Review Board. My name is Jeremy Gunn. I'm accompanied today by Doug Horn and Jim Gostley, both of the Review Board staff. I'd like to show you a document and ask you whether you previously have received a copy of this document before. It will take as much time as you need to look at it.
Yes, I am. I received.
Let me identify the document for the record as being exhibit number 198, which appears to be a letter to Mr. Custer accompanied by a subpoena ducis tecum and an attachment C that requests the production of papers and records. Mr. Custer, do you understand that you are here today pursuant to a subpoena issued by the Review Board?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any hesitancy or reluctance to be able to tell the truth and the whole truth as you understand it in relationship to the autopsy of President Kennedy?
I have no hesitation whatsoever.
Is there anything else that you brought with you today responsive to the subpoena request?
I brought the testing that was given by Dr. Ebersol that I went through last night and literally chewed up.
I assume you don't mean literally that you chewed it.
Well, let's put it this way. I made little notes on the side.
Okay. As I mentioned to you before, what we would like to do is, towards the end of the deposition, go through that with you and talk to you about that.
That's right.
Before we go into the events of November 22nd and 23rd, I'd like to ask you about any reading that you have done since the assassination of President Kennedy that pertained to the assassination or to the autopsy. So let me just start out with one obvious possibility. Have you ever read the Warren Report on the assassination?
Never had the chance. I never could get a copy of it.
Did you ever read the report of the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
That's another copy I couldn't get.
Okay. Are there any books or articles that you now recall that you read that pertain to the autopsy or the assassination?
Best Evidence.
That's a book by David Lifton.
David Lifton. High Treason.
And that's by Harry Livingston.
Right. And let's see what else. The one I showed you last night. I never brought it with me. It's in publication.
He has a manuscript, Treachery in Dallas, and then Golden Walnut.
Right. I have the original manuscript.
And have you read Treachery in Dallas?
I read the manuscript now. I'm not sure about the book.
Sure. Oh, that's fine. Are there any other books that you recall that you have read on the assassination or autopsy?
No, that's it. You want my opinion on it? Truthfully?
Not at this point. For the most part, during the course of the deposition, what we would like to get is your recollections of what you observed and what you heard at the time of the autopsy.
Sure.
So we would like to get that as candidly and correctly as we can.
That's fine.
Was there ever a time at which you were asked or requested not to speak about the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Well, there was two different situations. The next day, when Dr. Ebersol came back to Bethesda with the bone fragments and the bullet fragments for that time, and the time in the morgue, there's three, actually, and in Galloway's office.
Maybe if we could go through those three events in order. The first time that you were asked not to discuss the autopsy was
in the morgue.
In the morgue, and that was when in the morgue, on the night of November 22nd or 23rd?
On that night.
Okay. And who was it who asked you not to
Dr. Ebersol. You made it perfectly clear that I was not to speak about this.
What, if you could convey the sense of the words that he gave to you as best you can.
Keep your mouth shut.
Okay? That's
Plain and simple.
Okay, and the second time that you were asked or requested or instructed not to talk about the autopsy was when?
And that was the next day after he had come back from the White House from being debriefed.
And that was again Dr. Ebersol.
Dr. Ebersol.
Who had said it to you. Then the third time was...
Well, let's back up one thing.
Sure.
At that time, he made it quite clear this came from high level that I was not to say anything. And he reiterated anything. If I did, I would be quite sorry.
Did he tell you whom you mentioned a moment ago that he had been to the White House.
Right.
Did he tell you whom he had spoken with at the White House? Whom did he say he spoke with?
The head of the Secret Service.
When he said that high-level people did not want anything to be discussed, did he tell you who those high-level people were?
No, he just said high-level people.
Was Mr. Reed with you? Let me withdraw that. You're acquainted with the name Edward Reed?
Yes.
He was the one who's the student whom you identified in the photograph. Was Mr. Reed with you either during the first time that you received the instructions from Dr. Ebersol or the second time?
No. He was with me on the third time when we were both inducted. Well, actually, Vice Admiral Galloway's office.
Okay, could you tell me about the third time that you received instructions not to speak about
So
this?
that was the most dramatic. After I signed the gag order, I was told anything, no matter what, got out, it would be the sorriest day of my life. I spent most of my time behind the walls.
And did that threat sound credible to you?
Very credible.
Let me show you a document that is marked Exhibit number 195 and ask you whether you have previously seen that before.
Yep, this is it.
Now, I note that that document does not appear to have a signature on that. Do you see any signature on it?
No, I don't.
Is that the document, obviously without the signature, that you ended up signing?
Correct. I will not get out of that office unless I signed that signature, because there were armed guards that were right behind me. And I know for a fact if I did not sign that, I would have been gone. It was made quite clear.
Who else received instructions about not speaking about the autopsy at the same time that you did?
The only two people that were there, myself and Mr. Reed.
So Dr. Ebersol was not there at that time?
No, he wasn't.
Did you see Mr. Reed sign a statement similar to...
Yes, I did. He's another one that wouldn't have got out of the office. Okay. They don't have armed MPs standing there for nothing.
Is it your understanding now that the order of secrecy has been lifted?
Yes, it is.
Do you have any hesitancy now about talking candidly about what...
Absolutely not.
I'd like to ask you for your own individual sense and judgment of the quality of your memory of the events from November 22nd, 23rd. How good do you think your memory is of those events?
Unfortunately, too good.
What I'd like to do right now is develop with you a short chronology of the events so we can go through and identify the events that you participated in. Then we will go back and go through them and talk about them in depth. So if you could not provide too much detail at this point, but we'll go back and describe them in depth. When did you first hear that you would be having some kind of role in the autopsy?
That would be about an hour before.
Are you able now to identify an approximate time of day that you learned that?
Well, it was Friday night, approximately around, it had to be around dinner time because I had just finished eating dinner in the cafeteria. So it had to be around 5:30, somewhere around there.
In your previous answer, you said that it was an hour before it started. Were you referring to the beginning of the autopsy?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Approximately when did you take the first X-rays of President Kennedy?
Approximately, I would say, it would have, first thing I remember, it would have to be after the Y incision was made. So the autopsy was already in progress.
Okay, let me try and get a little bit of timing, and I understand this won't be entirely certain. Approximately how much time passed between the time that you first saw President Kennedy's body and the time that you took the first post-Y incision X-ray photograph? X-ray.
I would safely say within an hour, maybe a little less, maybe a little more, but it wasn't any more than that.
Okay, we'll come back and go through these things. Did you take X-rays in different series? And by that I mean, for example, did you take some X-rays of the head, leave and develop them, and then come back and take other X-rays?
Correct.
So you took different X-rays, developed them, came back with others.
Okay, and can I reiterate on this a little bit? Basically, because we didn't have enough film there at the time, so we had to take things in series, run back, develop them, and then bring them back.
What is your best recollection of the number of series of X-rays that you took on the night of November 22nd, 23rd?
You mean numbers pertaining to the head?
How many times did you take a series of X-rays, then go and develop them?
Figure, well, let's see, one. That would be one. Took 1, 2, 3, 2. About 3 or 4 times. Maybe 5 at the most.
Did you at any point during the evening see anyone from what I will call the presidential entourage or the presidential party?
First round of X-rays. I was coming up the main hall, like I explained to you.
You're referring to the hospital.
The picture that we had here, coming up the main hall towards the rotunda as they were coming in. And this is where I was stopped by the Secret Service.
So you're referring, stopped just before you entered into the rotunda?
They did not want them to see me because there was all the press here coming in, and they didn't want them to know that that was there.
Okay. So the presidential party passed through the rotunda in front of you, and then what happened to the presidential party?
They got onto the elevators and went up to the towers.
And after they had done that, what did you do?
I was allowed to pass, go to the back hall, and go up to the next room.
Okay. How were you able to determine that there were the people you saw were from the presidential entourage?
I saw Jacqueline Kennedy in a bloody dress that she still had.
Did you see anyone else you recognized?
If I'm not mistaken, I think I saw Bobby there that night, too. Either Bobby or Teddy, I'm not sure. Right on. I saw one of the brothers. I remember seeing them.
Did you at that time, or were you at that time able to identify the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara?
No.
If you had seen Robert McNamara, would you have known who he was?
At that time?
At that time, 1962.
Probably not.
What was the last series of X-rays that you took on the night of November 22nd?
The lower portion of the body.
And about how long after the first X-rays that you took did you take the last series of X-rays?
Oh, that's going to be kind of difficult because every time we brought X-rays back, getting dry. Every time we brought X-rays back, they were placed on the viewing box. There was a conversation between Ebersol and the two gentlemen who were doing the autopsy. And, of course, the gallery had to stick their 2 cents in, and it had to be most of the night.
What was, in a very general way, the condition of the body at the last time that you saw it on the night of November 22nd, 23rd?
Want me to be blunt?
Yes.
Mess. There was body fluid everywhere. The body was literally tortured.
Did you see any reconstruction of the body at all by morticians?
I remember when I looked into the skull, I remember seeing an apparatus in there. I wasn't sure what it was. I just remembered this.
When was it that you saw what you identified as an apparatus in the skull?
This was in the first series of films. The only reason why this clicked is because I remember I was told by the duty officer that the corpse was taken to Walter Reed Hospital first, compound, Walter Reed compound, first, and then brought.
Could you describe the apparatus that was in the skull?
It was non-human. I'm not sure if it was metallic or plastic. There was so much going on at that time. I just happened to see it. It registered, and that was it.
Did anyone besides the duty officer make any reference to Walter Reed?
Yes, that one gentleman was in the picture with Reed and myself. It was at the end there.
The one on the far left?
Far left, right. He was the duty officer. No, not there. The other picture.
Yeah. In addition to the duty officer, was there anyone else?
The chief on duty that night. There was two.
Okay.
There was a duty officer and a duty chief.
Okay. And they both said that the body had been to
Walter Reed. Compound. They didn't say hospital. They said compound.
Did you hear anyone else make any statements about Walter Reed other than the duty officer and the duty chief?
That's the only two.
Did you ever have occasion to make x-rays of any bone fragments from the head of President Kennedy?
That was the next day in a private room up on the 4th floor with a portable x-ray unit. And you want me to reiterate a little bit? I was told to place bone fragments on these, or not bone fragments, metal fragments that were given to me on these portions of the skull and take different exposures.
Okay, we'll get back to that later. Were you present in the autopsy during the time that any photographs were taken?
Photographs were being taken all the time. When I'd finish a set of films, Floyd would come in and shoot his films. He'd run through a complete roll of films and take them out of his camera. This is a couple of times that struck me funny. A couple of them were taken away from him. Then he had taken out of the camera and placed in light-proof little containers. A couple, the Secret Service come over and took them away from him for some reason. I couldn't figure that out. And Floyd kind of got to the point where he got upset about it. He said, hey.
When you say Floyd, you're referring to Floyd Reeby?
Right, correct.
Did you see any agent yourself take film away from him?
Yes, I did.
Did you see any agent actually expose film to light?
Not at that time.
Did you, at any point during the autopsy, actually see it?
No. I was too busy. I just remember seeing that particular incident.
In addition to Floyd Reeby's taking photographs, did you see anyone else take photographs?
There was a chief there that night that was taking movies. Remember I had stated that he was the gentleman that had committed suicide, supposedly, and had the deformed hand. They found the gun in that deformed hand. He was there that night taking movies.
Did you actually see him taking movies?
Yes, I did.
What kind of movie camera was he using?
I would imagine a simple 8mm.
Was he wearing a uniform?
Yes, he was.
And what was his rank?
Chief.
Did you hear any discussion during the time of the autopsy about movies being taken?
Well, there was quite a few upset people from the gallery that didn't like the idea. But the chief just kept right on going. And he says, I'm doing my job.
In addition to the chief who was, do you remember the chief's name?
No, I don't.
Does the name Pitzer mean anything to you?
Yes. Now, it rings a bell, but I'm not quite sure. But that name Pitzer does ring a bell.
Are you able to elaborate at all?
Not really, but I'm not sure if it could have been brought to my recollection that night that we had to get together in Pittsburgh. I think it was Pittsburgh. Yes, it was.
But did you know that name at all?
No, I didn't know that name at that time. No, I didn't. Some of the stuff's starting to come back.
Did you see any other photographers during the night of the autopsy?
No, the only ones that I saw were the news photographers out in the rotunda, and the ones that kept trying to get in there, and the guards keeping them up.
Do you know the name John Stringer?
I've heard the name, but I don't recollect personally who he is.
A few questions back, I asked you if you had seen the body of President Kennedy at any time after there had been reconstruction. We then went off to the apparatus that you talked about. We go back and let me ask you again, did you see the body at all after there had been any morticians reconstructing or sewing the body?
When I left, the mortician was coming in.
At the time that you left, when the mortician was coming in, is that the last time that you saw President Kennedy's body?
Absolutely. That's when I took my x-ray machine and all my cassettes with me.
I'd like to now go back a little bit. We'll start doing this chronologically. Could you tell me how much training that you had received in radiology prior to November 22nd, 1963?
All right, I had 2 years of extensive schooling. Plus, I had a year that I had to sit with a radiologist in a reading room. Plus, I had my normal duty.
When did you receive your 2 years of schooling? What were the approximate dates?
I'm not sure. You got me there. I'm not sure the actual date. It was, I would have to estimate around, I don't know. I don't want to say because it would, I'm not sure it would be correct.
Where did you receive your...
Right there in Bethesda. I went to school right there for 2 years.
Where did you have your 1 year of training after the...
Right there at Bethesda. In fact, that's why I stayed right there. So it had to be within that time period. Everything was right there.
If we were to go back 3 years from November 63, we go back to
That
1960.
could be a good estimation.
So it would be most likely the beginning years of 1960s that you
Correct.
received your training.
Correct.
And was all of that training through the Navy?
All through the Navy.
Prior to the time of the autopsy of President Kennedy, had you ever been present during an autopsy?
Once or twice. And that was basically because of the training that I had to go through, the x-ray training, just to see what the cadavers look like.
Was any of the prior autopsies that you had attended a gunshot wound autopsy?
There was, let me take that back. When I was stationed in Quantico, Virginia. There was a hospital corpsman on duty that night. They had brought 2 Marine guards in that were playing quick draw, and I had to go to the autopsy that next morning and testify to what I had saw, and this was gunshot wounds to the head. And I will reiterate and say that these autopsies were quite efficient, thorough, and the doctor that was doing the autopsy knew exactly what he was doing because everything was done methodically. He would do one portion of the autopsy, documentation, another part, documentation, another part, documentation. So everything was definitely documented at that time. I can honestly say that night was a total disaster.
When you say that night, you're referring to November 22nd,
November
62. In what ways did the autopsy, as you observed it on November 22nd, differ from the previous gunshot autopsy that you had seen?
They would pull out an organ, big organ, and be up there cutting an organ up like a piece of meat.
This is on November 22nd.
Right, November 22nd. Then their basic thing was, we're looking for shells, bullets, fragments. They weren't looking for what caused it, how was it done, what was the tracing, or what was the path of the bullet.
How is it that you came to the impression that what they were doing was looking for bullet fragments?
It was plain and simple. They came right out and said, you're taking x-rays for bullets.
Do you recall who it was who said that?
Both Humes said this to Ebersol, and Ebersol said the same thing to me. And then he turned to me and says, take whatever films you feel necessary. And he's the radiologist. He's supposed to lead me, not me lead him. And I'm showing him the films and I'm saying, well, hey, doctor, you think this stuff? Shut up, it's none of your business.
Do you know whether Dr. Ebersol knew how to take x-rays himself?
Let me specify something to you right now. He's a lieutenant, well, no, he's not a lieutenant commander. He's a full command in the United States Navy. If you know anything about ranking officers and enlisted men, ranking officers do not lower themselves in doing the enlisted man's job. They have a technician there. The technician takes the x-rays. The radiologist reads the x-rays. Plain and simple. It's an unwritten law.
That said, do you know whether Dr. Ebersol knew how to take x-rays if he had wanted to? And what I'm asking is not what you would guess, but just what you know.
I'm not trying to be facetious about this, but that's funny. Dr. Ebersol had a very highfalutin attitude about things. I don't want to dirty my hands. And this was his opinion. I'm here, you're here. That's fine. You want to feel that way, that's fine. I'll do my job. Do my job to the best of my ability. But don't step on my toes and say, you're doing my job. And he had a bad habit of doing that. He was a gentleman that liked to bask in the glory. But when the heat come down, he was the first one that went out the door.
When you say the heat came down, are you referring to his behavior generally, or are you referring to something specifically on the night of the autopsy?
Well, he was not a leader. He was a person that could be led. He was told what to do, and he did it. And, excuse me, Gerald.
We'll pause there and continue Gerald Custer's testimony in episode 73. Well, I don't know how much of that was evil at work, how much of that was a simple rushed autopsy, or even how much of that was an entangled combination of both. Once we are through the entire testimony, I will summarize the more important highlights of what we are hearing from Gerald Custer. Remember, it's long. There was almost 3.5 hours of original testimony before the edits, so we've got a ways to go. Let's continue listening to Gerald Custer in the next episode, episode 73. Thank you for listening to episode 72 of JFK, The Enduring Secret. Welcome to JFK and the Enduring Secret. I'm your host, Jeff Crudell. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is episode 73. Today's episode is a continuation of the Gerald Custer testimony. So, without further ado, let's listen to episode 73 of JFK, The Enduring Secret.
Just with respect to the autopsy and what you observed that night, did you see Dr. Ebersol doing something different from what you thought he should be doing during the course of the autopsy?
Correct. Yes, absolutely. He should have been directing me as he viewed the films. Each set of films I brought down to him, I put on a board. I had a certain amount of expertise that I felt should have been noticed. I tried to bring this up to him and tried to suggest different things to him, and he wouldn't listen. He kept listening to the gallery. He was being led, plain and simple. It was right there. You couldn't help but see it.
When you say he's being led by the gallery, do you mean by particular people in the gallery?
At least two particular people. One, a high-ranking military official. There was a four-star general in there. Plus, there was a civilian gentleman, which I took to be Kennedy's personal physician because the way he talked. Particularly pertaining to the myelogram dye in the back. He knew exactly what it was. And the only person that would know situations like that would be the personal physician.
And were this general and the person in civilian clothing giving directions to Dr. Ebersol?
Correct. Absolutely.
And what kinds of directions were they giving to him?
In the sense that the Kennedy family would not like you to pursue that path any further. We do not want you to go any more in this direction.
Did you perceive those sorts of comments during the night of the autopsy to be related to personal health concerns and disfigurement of the body, or did you understand them to be pertaining to something else?
I understood them to be pertaining to something else.
What was it that you understood them to be pertaining to?
Let me put it this way, plain and simple. The autopsy was something that had to be done. Didn't have to be done correctly. It had to be done for record purposes only. Finding out facts, forget it. This is something that had to be done, but done in a way that's not going to implicate. And this is basically the opinion I got because I made that statement and I was told to shut up.
To whom did you make the statement?
Well, I made it to Dr. Ebersol, and Dr. Ebersol told me right away to shut my mouth. Do your job. Now, it didn't take a person with a genius intelligence to figure it out. It was right there.
Were there any other observations that you had that night that led you to draw the conclusions that you've been drawing?
The film being taken from Floyd, photographs, the exposed photographs, the comments being made, Dr. Fink coming in and pushing Humes and Boswell out of the limelight and taking over. Different phone calls being received during the autopsy. You know as well as I do, when you're doing a forensic autopsy, you do not want to be disturbed. Your mind is following a train of thought. You're not receiving phone calls. They received phone calls from Dallas. I know for a fact they received phone calls from downtown Washington.
Let me go back to Dr. Finkman and talk about the phone calls. In what way did the direction of the autopsy change after Dr. Fink arrived?
In the sense that he was more, how can I put it, cohesive with direction from the gallery. When I lifted the body up, take films of the torso and the lumbar spine and the pelvis, this is one a king-size fragment. I'd say, estimate around 3-4 centimeters, fell from the back. And this is when Dr. Fink came over with a pair of forceps, picked it up, and took it. That's the last time I ever saw him. And it was big enough. That's about, I'd say, 1.5 inches. My finger. A small finger. First joint.
In addition to identifying that fragment or picking up that fragment, what else did Dr. Fink do that led you to believe that he was taking or that he was directing the autopsy?
Well, he would bark orders at Humes and Boswell.
What kinds of orders did he give?
Stop that, don't do that anymore. Where you take records, or you take notes. Yes.
Was it your impression that Dr. Fink was taking instructions from one or more persons in the gallery? Or
absolutely.
And from whom was he taking instructions?
The same two gentlemen that kept rolling the situation all that night.
You've previously referred to that person being the 4-star general. Which service was that 4-star general with, do you know?
I'll be honest with you. All I saw was 4 big stars. That was enough.
But you're calling him a general. It's presumably not an admiral, if that's fair.
Yes.
Presumably be either Army or Air Force?
That has to be one of the two. Well, I know an admiral when I see one. Absolutely. He's got gold halfway up his elbow.
After 1963, did you do any further work in X-ray technology or radiology?
Yes, I was employed. Well, when I came back to Pittsburgh after I was discharged, I kind of bounced around a little bit. Then I got a job in Montefiore Hospital in and around, I'd say, 84, 83, somewhere around there. And I stayed there for about, no, it was a little bit earlier than that. It was in the 80s. And I stayed there for about 18 years, and I went to UPMC, and I became a min manager. Plus, I took X-rays also.
When you say UPMC, that is?
University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is a big transplant center.
Would it be fair to say then, from some point in the early 1980s through the present, you have continued to work either in X-ray technology or radiology?
All right. I would have to cut that off around 1994 when the government came in and was downsizing the different hospitals. I happened to be one of the first victims because of budget cuts. But prior to, I figure I had about 28 years of experience. Plus, that's not counting my service time.
From what I'm understanding, you did radiology work from approximately 1960 through approximately 1963.
Right.
Did you do it in the service after 1963?
Yes, I was stationed on a troop transport, but not as much. It was basically hospital core work, but they still had an X-ray machine there, and of course, because they had the machine, they had to have an X-ray technician. It was a little portable. Something that you'd find in the Smithsonian at this time.
Approximately what year did you get out of the service?
It would have to be dates. I went in 69.
59?
59 rather. 59, and I served about 5 years, so that would have to be around just before the Vietnam crisis. It would be around 65, 66, somewhere around there. Because I was discharged 2 minutes after midnight. Oh no, I was discharged at midnight and 2 minutes after the extension went through. So they had to bring me in to Norfolk. They had to move to a transport from midstream all the way back in, drop a microbe, take me in, drop me off, and go back out again. I'm sure that cost them a nice piece of change.
From the time that you left the service until early 1980s, did you do any work in radiology or X-ray technology?
From the time I left the service? Well, this is the time that I kind of bounced around a little bit. Kind of got my bearings. And then that's when I went to work for Monica. It was like a year or two in and around there.
We have talked about some of the records that you saw being taken during the autopsy, including the X-rays, photographs, the motion picture. In addition to those that you've already mentioned, is there any other documentation that you observed being made that pertain to the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Dr. Hughes and Boswell, they were writing in their notebooks.
Okay. Could you describe what the notebooks looked like?
No, typical black little notebook.
In addition to Humes and Boswell, did you see anyone else taking notes?
There was a few people in the gallery.
Are there any other records that you know about that relate to the autopsy? And by that, I would use, for example, log books or any other sorts of documentation.
There was a logbook in the radiology department. If I'm not mistaken, I made an entry that I had dispatched to the morgue to take film. But I wasn't allowed to place any other identification in there pertaining to what I did or who it was or whatever.
When you say a duty log, is there any other name that went by other than duty log?
There might have been the duty officer might have made his log, and maybe the chief on his log too.
Do you have any knowledge as to whether those duty logs are the kind of records that are kept permanently by the
I
military?
have no idea. I would basically say no.
Were you at any point asked to expunge any entries, to delete any references?
Yes, definitely.
Could you describe that for me, please?
Well, I had made the statement on the one duty log in the main X-ray department that I was going to the morgue X-ray President Kennedy, and I was told to eradicate it. In fact, I was told to tear the whole page off.
Did you tear the whole page out?
Yeah. I gave it to Eversole, and he destroyed it.
Did you see him destroy it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Yes. I saw him destroy it.
Did he give you any explanation as to why he wanted it destroyed?
None of my business. That's exactly what he said. I asked him, I said, what are you writing that up for? That's official government property. He says, none of your business, and brought it up. This is why I kept saying, Dr. Eversole was not a leader. Dr. Eversole was a follower. He did what he was told to do.
Did you see anyone else taking any notes of the autopsy?
Many people that I had stated to you, Boswell, a few of the gallery people, and that's about it, really.
Did you see any FBI or Secret Service agents taking notes?
That's right. Siebert and O'Neill. I could swear they were writing a book that night. Everything that happened. Write it down.
Had you known Siebert and O'Neill from
Never.
other time?
And truthfully, I'm not even sure which one followed them. I know it was one of the two of them. And I know I said the Secret Service, but I meant FBI. Let me correct that right now. It was the FBI agent that followed me up to the 4th floor. In fact, he was the gentleman who wanted to come in the darkroom with me and watch me develop the films. And I pushed him out. I said, you can't come in here.
And that was either Mr. Siebert or O'Neill?
One of the two.
When is the first time that you saw a casket on November 22nd?
When they brought the casket into the morgue.
Did you see the casket on the loading dock?
No. I was already in the morgue. I had the portable X-ray unit in there. I had the aprons. I had the cassettes. And the honor guard brought the casket in.
So, the first time that you saw the casket in the hallway or in the morgue itself?
In the morgue itself.
Could you look at the diagram that's marked 201, again, is the diagram that you brought with you today?
Mm-hmm.
The diagram puts, again, this is what is written on the diagram, the shipping casket from Dallas, Texas, and that is marked with an X on the diagram. Do you see that?
Let me make a correction now. I see it. I didn't see it before. Let me make a correction here. This table,
You're pointing at the one that's marked number
one, was further back here.
You're putting it more
Where
towards...
where the shipping casket was. Shipping casket was brought in to about here.
And what you're doing is pointing to a
about
space just below
This
number
was a
2.
dissecting table.
You're pointing now at number 2 when you said
Number
dissecting
2.
table.
This was a rise dissecting table. Okay, that's number 2. The casket was, brought in, dropped here.
Okay, just so the record is clear here, in the drawing that we have now, there is between the table marked number 1 and the gallery, there's an X. What you're saying now in terms of where you're pointing is that the correct location for that X should be in the same place, but right between number 2 and the gallery.
This was a movable table.
You're now pointing to number 1.
Number 1 was movable. So what they did is they brought the table over here, placed the body on the table, brought the table back to where the shipping casket was. It didn't dawn on me. Now it does. Because this was further this way, and then you had your viewing boxes here.
Okay, again, I'm going to try and correct this for the record.
Sure, absolutely.
And tell me if I'm saying any of this incorrectly. What you are saying, from what I understand, is that the table that's marked number 1 was actually, at the beginning of the autopsy, was located between what is marked number 2 and the gallery.
No, okay, correct. This table, number 1, was placed on this drawing where your Exhibit 201, where the shipping casket was.
Okay.
All right. Basically, because I remember I couldn't get back in here real well.
Back into the gallery?
And between the gallery and the table to take the one lateral. The one lateral was nipped at the occipital region because of that.
And you're referring to the lateral
of the skull.
Of the skull.
And I will elaborate on that further on after I see the films and tell you what I had to do. And because of situation, they brought the casket in near the raised table number 2, which was the dissecting table. This table was movable.
And you're now
number 1 was taken over to the casket. The body was lifted out, placed on the table. All right, I helped them lift the body out, placed it on the table. They took the casket back out of the room, through the cooling room, moved the table over closer to the gallery, and this is when I was told that I could leave. They'll call me back.
Okay. I'm going to hand you a blue pen and ask you if you could mark on to exhibit number 201. And why don't you make a circle with an X in it at the place where the casket was first placed in the autopsy room. Okay, and then just put an X through the middle of that. Okay, and that's with blue. And now, from what I'm understanding from your testimony, is that after the casket was placed there, the table that's marked number 1 was finally moved over next to where you have drawn the blue circle. The body was put on the table.
Right, and brought back.
And brought back to where there is the, currently is written shipping casket from Dallas, Texas. Maybe what I'll ask you to do is to put one extra line through the one that you've drawn, so that one will have 3 dissecting lines, whereas the original on the drawing that we have just has 2 dissecting lines. Does that make sense?
The only reason why I didn't catch it before is because I just scanned this real quick and I didn't see it. I didn't register shipping casket. And I remember having problems getting back in here because if you'd see the X-ray unit that I used, it was a big, cumbersome thing. It's not like the new ones today. They're a little bit smaller and they get into the small hole there. And this was too close here. It was close enough that I could just get in there. Just enough to get in there to get that film.
And what you're saying is that the table marked number 1 was too close to the gallery for you to get between.
Right. It was just enough to get the tube head in. That was it. But I couldn't get what I wanted to get. But I would have to get more detailed in there later and tell you why. Due to the condition of the skull and due to this was the typical autopsy table, which was concave.
Okay.
So I had to build the head up. But when I built the head up, the head was so unstable due to the the fractures. Fractures were extremely numerous. It was like somebody took a hard-boiled egg and just rolled it in her hand. And that's exactly what the head is like.
So when you say that it's like that, you mean the pieces of the shell are analogous to the pieces of the skull, is that right?
And every time you picked the head up, you could feel this part of the head would come up, this part of the head would be here. And it was just, the only thing that held it together was skin. And even that was loose.
Okay. All right, let's go back to your first side of the casket. Were you present when the casket was opened?
Yes.
And what was it that you first saw when the casket... Well, actually, let me go back to another question. Could you describe what the casket looked like?
I don't think it was a shipping casket. I remember seeing a bronze ceremonial casket brought in. I don't know where they got the shipping casket at. The shipping casket, to me, is a tin, metal-colored gray thing. And that certainly wasn't what he was put in.
Okay. Hold on just 1 second.
If you're talking to the President of the United States, why would they put him in a shipping casket? They have to have some dignity about this.
Yep, you can hold for just 1 moment.
Sure.
Off the record. Okay. Before we went off the record, you were describing the casket that you saw in the morgue at Bethesda. I'd like to show you some photographs and ask you whether the casket that you see in the photograph is the same one that you saw, or the same general type, we'll say, as the one that you saw in the morgue.
Yes, this is
That's what it looked like. What I'd like to do is mark this as exhibit number 204.
You got to remember something. There was more than one casket.
When you say there's more than one casket, what do you mean?
There was a casket brought in the back by a black Cadillac ambulance. Plus, there was a casket that Jacqueline Kennedy had in her entourage.
Well, could you describe for me all of the caskets that you saw? The first one you have described as being a bronze casket and looking like the photograph on exhibit number 204. What other caskets did you see on the night of November 22nd, 23rd?
There was also a bronze casket that I saw that night too.
Where did you see that?
That was sitting next to the one in the cooling room.
When did you first see that? And you're referring to the
Right.
cooler room that's just outside the morgue from
Correct.
exhibit number 201.
Right.
When did you first see the second casket in the cooler room?
When I left the first time after the first set of films.
And could that casket have been the same one that you previously saw?
I don't think so. There were two of them there.
Two of them there. How did the appearance of the second casket differ from the one that had been in the morgue itself?
To the best of my recollection, they looked pretty close.
Was the second casket open or closed?
Close.
Did you ask anyone what that casket was?
No, I'm sorry. Again, I was told, and it stuck in my mind, do not ask questions, do what you're supposed to do, get it done, and then you're done.
In addition to those two caskets, did you see any other casket that night?
To the best of my recollection, no.
Now, you were referring a minute ago to what I'd understood a casket that came in a black ambulance. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
What is your basis for making that comment?
Well, I saw the ambulance, and I saw them bring it in out of the back of the ambulance.
So this is the third casket?
No. This is the first casket.
That's the first one. Okay.
This is the one that I saw that they took the body out of this casket, and we put it on the table, and I left. I came back later, took the first set of films. Okay, in the process of doing the first set of films, I went out. Wait, let me back up here. I'm confusing myself here. The first set of films, I went out through here, the casket.
And you're referring to the door
through the door,
cooler room.
Through the cooler room. There was a casket sitting over here. Plus there was another casket sitting over here. And this is when I had come up to the hall going to the main entrance. And once I hit the main entrance, this is when I come up and I saw the entourage. At that time, if I'm not mistaken, the casket had come around from that entourage already to the back.
Now, I may be mistaken, but I had thought that you said earlier in the deposition that the first time that you saw a casket was in the morgue itself.
Yes.
After you first saw a casket in the morgue itself, did you see another casket being unloaded from the ambulance?
No, absolutely not. This is the only one I saw being unloaded.
And now you're referring to the one in the morgue.
After I took the first set of films, that's when I saw the second one.
But you didn't see that being unloaded from an ambulance?
No.
Did you ever see the ambulance?
I saw the first ambulance.
When you saw the first ambulance, where was it?
Right here at the loading dock. That's when I come around to see what was going on. I heard them coming.
Okay.
And I came to this door and I could see them unloading from the ambulance.
And they were unloading at that point, what
right.
you understand to be the second casket?
No, this was the first casket.
Okay, well...
You're getting a little confused here. There was... the second casket wasn't brought in. I did not see the second casket until after the first set of films. Now I remember there was I saw this first casket. I left for at least an hour. When I come back, I come in, took films. After I took the films, I left again. This is when I saw the second casket.
And did you see the second casket being unloaded?
No.
But you saw a black ambulance out at the loading dock?
Right.
And it was your assumption that the second casket came out of the black ambulance. Is that correct?
No. I can't assume that because I didn't see it.
Are you certain that the ambulance was black rather than gray or white?
I'm sure the first one was black. It had to be. You must remember I told you I was told the body had went to Walter Reed compound first. I don't know what ambulance they put it in, but I just remember seeing a black ambulance there. There was a gray one. I know that for a fact because I saw it later. I was told, too, that there was a gray ambulance with the entourage. But that's it. I never saw it here at the back, plain and simple.
Where and when did you see the gray ambulance?
When? Later on, at the end of the night, I saw it.
Was it out near the loading dock?
It was parked there. Not at the dock itself. It was parked off to the side.
Did you see any helicopters at Bethesda that night?
I was told a helicopter had come in.
Did you see one?
No, I didn't see it.
Hear one?
I was just told that it had come in.
Who told you?
The duty officer. And then the casket was to be loaded on an ambulance and brought in.
To be loaded on an ambulance where?
I don't know.
Okay. Could you describe the appearance of President Kennedy when the casket was first opened in the morgue?
What surprised me, he had a plastic bag around his head with sheets wrapped around it. And you could see the blood on the sheets. But that's all I saw. After we got him on the table, I was asked to leave. I didn't see anything else.
When you say a plastic...
He was still dressed in a suit.
He was dressed in a suit?
That's when I saw him.
When you say a plastic bag around his head, does that mean around the head but not any other part of the body?
Best of my recollection, that's all I remember, just around his head.
What was it? Colored plastic or clear plastic?
I'd have to surmise. I'm not sure. I just remember it was a plastic covering. Well, I guess it had to be clear because I saw the sheets. The sheets were bloody.
Okay, just to make sure that I'm understanding, the body then is taken out, put on the table,
Right.
and at that point you were asked to leave.
Leave.
Okay.
So from there on, whatever occurred, I was not there.
And so at this point you did not take any x-rays yourself?
None.
Now when you left the morgue, where did you go?
Back upstairs to the X-ray department.
Through the rotunda.
Right.
And on that trip is not the time that you saw the presidential entourage?
No.
That was later?
Later.
Right. And previously you said that in this deposition, if I understand correctly, that you were out of the morgue for, the way that I'm understanding, as you said, about an hour, maybe more, maybe less,
Right.
approximately an hour.
Right.
Were you with Mr. Reed at that time, during that hour, or approximately an hour?
Best of my recollection, yes, I do believe so.
Was anyone else with you at that time?
There was one of the FBI agents who were with us.
But at this time you were not developing any x-rays?
No.
Right. Did you talk at all about what you had just seen?
No. We were told not to.
What circumstances led to your going back to the morgue?
We were summoned.
You got a telephone call?
Right.
Do you remember who the call was from?
Ebersol.
When you went back to the morgue, did you take any film cassettes with you?
Definitely, because we didn't have enough with us.
If I can go out of order chronologically, when did you take the portable x-ray equipment to the morgue?
Oh, this was at the beginning. This is when we first found out that we were going to be using the machine, and that was done there. Placed there before anything had come through. Anything.
Could you describe the portable x-ray machine that you took to the morgue?
It was an old GE unit that weighed anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 pounds. I mean, it was a bulky, old unit.
About how big was it? You can just describe the dimensions.
All right, I'm about 5'11". The main tower was pretty close to 6 foot. The table, the base unit was approximately 3 foot by 3 foot. And it was about 3 foot high. It had a bunch of knobs on it. It had the door in the front where all the cassettes would go. And the tube was able to swing 360 degrees until 90 or 360 feet away.
Was it on wheels?
Yes.
So you could push it down the hallway?
Yes. With great difficulty. So the old machine, it was heavy.
Okay, we can go back now to the chronology. You have now come back into the morgue after having been summoned by Dr. Ebersol. What do you observe of the body of President Kennedy? What was the condition at that point?
The body was completely nude. The Y incision had been made, and the skull literally was a mess.
The Y incision, you say, had been made. Had any of the organs been removed at that time?
Not sure, truthfully. I would safely say yes, because I remember when I come in, I remember Dr. Boswell up there sauteing the liver, and, it has to be. It have to be. I can't say all of them were removed. I know a good portion of them were removed.
What was the first series of x-rays that you took?
Definitely skull film.
How many skull films did you take?
Well, I took modified waters, and basically the only reason why I took a modified waters is because rigor mortis had already set in, and the head was placed in the head was positioned already in a 30-degree up tilt due to the rigor mortis being set in. And the head, like I had stated before, was in such an unstable situation because due to all the fractures, I could only place so much steadying apparatus around it to get a halfway decent film. So what you saw was an elongation of the orbits, which showed you right there was a 30-degree up tilt. Now, when the orbits are the other direction becomes smaller, you're going tilting towards the feet.
Can you explain what you mean by orbits?
Orbits are your eye sockets, where your eyes and your optic nerves fit in.
And so when you were referring to the degrees, it is how far the head has been either tilted back or tilted forward.
Correct.
In relationship to the neck.
Correct.
When you refer to a modified waters, is that a particular angle?
A full waters is 45 degrees. All right. And that's taken at a posterior and anterior. When you're in the irregular radiological position, anterior is your front, posterior is your back. Okay, all the films were taken in an anterior, posterior position. There's no way in God's creation we could have turned this body over on the stomach and done the film the way they should have been done. So we had to do them to the best possible way and get the best possible film in that particular.
One moment, Archie, to go over.
Thank you for listening to episode 73 of JFK, The Enduring Secret. Welcome to JFK and The Enduring Secret. I'm your host, Jeff Crudell. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is episode 74. Episode 74 is a continuation of the Gerald Custer testimony. So, without further ado, let's listen to episode 74 of JFK, The Enduring Secret.
Let me go back to an earlier question and ask you, how many exposures did you take of the skull?
Took an anterior, posterior, both laterals, and I took 2 oblique films. And the only reason why I took the 2 oblique films were to show any depth in bullet fragments.
Is there a particular name or particular type of oblique films that you took?
No, I just took them to show fragments and to show the gaping holes.
What I'm thinking of is a term such as town or tangential.
Okay, well, you could call them tangential views, but you wouldn't call them towns. Towns is a complete, where you bring the chin all the way down to the chest, and you bring it in, you're diverging your central ray through the forehead, and it comes down through the occipital opening. It shows you foramen magnum. That's where the spine comes through.
And did you take a town's...
My best recollection, no. There's no way to take it because of the rigor mortis, the way the head was positioned. You couldn't get it real good towns. So I totally eliminated it because of that.
Was there any brain inside the cranium at the time that you took the first series of x-rays?
To the best of my recollection, no.
Were you present at any time while brain tissue was being removed?
No, I wasn't.
Jeremy, for the record, your question was obliterated by his answer. Were you present at any time while the brain tissue was being
removed?
No, I wasn't.
Did you ever see a wound on the front of President Kennedy's throat or the anterior of the throat?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe the wound that you observed?
A typical bullet hole.
How large was it?
I would estimate a little bit bigger than my little finger in dimension. Across circumference. Or a diameter.
Okay, so there was not a long incision or cut on the throat that you observed, is that correct?
Not at that time, I didn't.
And the first time that you saw this wound on the throat was when? At the time you were taking the x-rays or before?
This was at the time I was taking the x-ray.
Did you ever see a wound on the back of President Kennedy?
That's when I picked him up and the bullet dropped out of there. There was a small wound.
Where was that wound located?
I would have to estimate in down mid-thoracic, somewhere around there, or upper thoracic.
And what kind of wound did that appear to be to you?
Another small bullet hole.
And other than the Y incision, did you observe any other wounds on President Kennedy's body other than those you've described?
Let's see, I'm trying to think now. Well, there was a gaping hole in the right parietal region. The right eyeball was protruding. And truthfully, if you know anything about basic physics, when you have a force, you have an equal and opposite force in the other direction. So that kind of, at that time, it didn't come to my recollection of what it was, but later on, I realized that had to be an entrance wound of some sort there. Because if you read in that the transcription that I brought in, that's brought out.
Off the record for a moment.
Went off the record right away.
Sure. I may ask you about it when we get back.
Okay, that's fine. Your first exhibit there is taken anterior posterior. And that's not, and I do say that is not a correct radiological position. It's only done when any facial fractures are suspected. Because look at the orbits, look how small, how large they are. When you take a proper anterior posterior film, the orbits are a lot smaller than that. That's due right there. Because when you think of what's going on here. Let me show you something. Give me one film. So you have your patient laying on the table. You have your source 44 inches here. The only way to get rid of distortion, you have to have a 72-inch distance. This totally eliminates all distortion. This is why only chest X-rays are taken at 72 inches. Because you get the exact size of the heart that you have. If you were taken any closer, it would show the heart as a king-size thing, and everybody would have cardiomegaly. So this is basically incorrect when you see this. I want to get that down right away.
Okay.
I have been off my stenographic record.
Oh, yeah, that's understood. Mr. Custer, I'd like to show you 3 documents that we've marked exhibits numbers 205, 206, and 207 that are schematic drawings of a skull. And what I'd like to do is to ask you some questions about the wounds that you saw on the skull. So this will not be a question about the X-rays that you took, but just the wounds that you could observe with your own eyes of the skull. What I'd like to ask you to do, and you can choose any of the 3 diagrams, any one or more of the 3 diagrams, to draw where you saw the injuries to the damage to the skull.
Okay, basically, the lateral skull, which is marked exhibit 206, damage was in the parietal temporal region. So that would have to involve all the way down through here. Then you had a ragged piece of bone that come up like this, and then down through here. On the one X-ray, you could actually see the sella turcica, which is called the turkey saddle. That is the keystone of the cranial vault, which holds the brain. And on the one lateral, this was very prominent. You could actually see this. Here, you would, like I said before, the right eye was out like this. This whole portion, back through here, there was fractures up through here, fractures through here, fractures through here.
What I need to do is make sure this makes sense on the record. Now, what you've done is drawn a shape that I'll call somewhat kidney-shaped onto the drawing, and that is the part of the skull that was missing.
Right.
Is that correct?
Correct. This was all gaping. And in fact, it may have gone a little bit further back into here.
Okay, well, if you could draw it best you can.
This is the best of my recollection. It could have come back into here a little bit more. I mean, it was king-size hole. I have extremely large hands. And to estimate the size of the hole, I can put my hands together and place my hands in the skull.
Now, on the drawing that you have made, and with the bones as they're identified here, none of the principal part of the missing wound goes into the occipital bone. Is that correct?
The whole doesn't, but this is all unstable. A lot of this bone was out. It would flap out.
And when you say this bone, you're referring to
the occipital region.
Parietal?
Right, and part of the lambdoidal, and down through the posterior, the occipital protuberance. This was all unstable material. I mean, completely.
Could you use the blue pen and make hash marks that will cover the portion of the bone that was missing from the skull?
In what way? What do you mean?
So, just make marks of that.
Okay. Oh, it has to be like that.
So that this is so that a person reading the transcript will understand what the portion that you're saying is missing.
See, this portion here was like a irregular. You know what it actually? Oh, go ahead.
You're referring to. I'm sorry. You're referring. When you say this here, it's not going to be clear on the transcript.
The temporal bone area.
What you're referring to is the suture between the temporal bone and the parietal bone. Okay.
This flapped out. It looked as if they had sawed it. But this was all missing here.
And when you say this, you're referring to the hash marks.
The hash marks and the parietal bone.
Okay. Now, earlier, again, just to make sure this is clear for the record, you were saying that the bone was split and fragmented. You're referring to the part outside of the hash mark, but along the back.
In fact, this part, which is between I'd say superior to the lambdoidal suture, this part of the skull came out, past the line, and come back in and ragged it.
What you just did is draw a straight line near the top of the cranium, and then a line down that connects.
Which tells you, again, you had to have a king-size force coming anterior to posterior. Everything seemed like it was just pushed backwards. This whole area blew out.
You're referring again to the part
that have the temporal area, temporal bone, the parietal bone. Okay. And this flopped.
Okay. Now, you referred to portions of the skull being missing. Can you tell me whether scalp was missing there too?
It was shredded. Scalp was shredded. And it was loose. When I remember when I first came in and saw the face, everything had been drooped, like somebody had pulled the scalp and pulled it down. I had to look twice at it.
Now, this time when you see this is when you have been out of the morgue for approximately an hour and you've come back, that you see it that way.
Right.
Could you look at the drawing on exhibit number 207 and draw on that exhibit where the skull was missing?
Right. Here you have that flap again.
And you're referring to the top right
corner. The temporal line in and around that area. And this whole area, back through here, was gone.
And if you could make hash marks on that again.
But again, this was all unstable.
You're now referring to the occipital
bone. And you had fractures, through here, and near the sagittal suture, you had that portion of the bone that protruded upward.
Okay.
Now, this is the estimation, really.
I understand. Okay. When you took the x-rays, did you have any kind of markers or tags that would identify, for example, who the subject of the x-ray was or some unique identifier?
Nothing that would identify the subject. I had my own little measuring device on it.
What kind of measuring device was that?
Well, it showed if the position was too far to the left, too far to the right, or the chin was up too high, the chin was on. They had like little holes in it, and you could see them. It would either elongate or you'd see a little dot.
Was there a name for that measuring device?
It was my own personal. Excuse me. It was my own personal device.
Were there any other identifiers that would appear on the film that would help, say, when the officer...
Maybe, I'm not sure now. It could have had the hospital identification on the film. That's possible. I'm not sure.
Is there any other way that you can think of that if we were to show you X-rays that you would help you identify whether they are X-rays that you yourself took on the night of November?
Well, there's one in particular, one of the laterals, where Dr. Ebersol put it too close to the hot light, and he burnt the emulsion.
When did that happen?
That was after the first set of skull films were taken. And the AP cervical spine showed metal fragments. And one of the laterals also showed a bone fragment that had the conus in it. If you've ever used a fragment bullet, when it goes in, it fragments, and the further it goes in, the cone becomes bigger. So you have a small... Let me write your pen. I know this is hard to put it on record. Like your cone starts small, and as you come out, it expands. Say this being the front of the skull, the forehead, the orbits, the nasion, which is the nose, the jaw, and back the occipital region. That's very crude drawing, but basically you get the idea.
Can we go off the record for a second? Could you read the fact on the record? Mr. Custer, is there any other identifying information that would help you be able to determine whether an X-ray that you took that night was in... Let me withdraw that. Is there any other type of identifier that you can think of that would help you determine whether an X-ray is one that you took on the night of November 22nd or 23rd?
Well, there's one that I know for a fact of the lumbar spinal region. He had myelogram dye, and it's a contrast media dye. As you must remember, Kennedy had a back problem, which he had to come to Bethesda to get films and treatment for anyway. And this is one time that I had met him prior. Basically, that's it, really.
Who was involved in the setting up of the X-rays on the skull?
I was.
Anyone besides yourself?
No, I was.
You did all of the work?
I did all of the work.
What was Mr. Reed's role at that time?
Just assisting me and handing me films and basically taking the cassettes out of the dirty coverings.
Did Dr. Ebersol play any role in the technical part of taking the...
None whatsoever. I had total control. In fact, like I had stated to you before, I was guiding him instead of him guiding me.
After you had finished taking the X-rays of the skull, what did you do?
They were taken upstairs to the department, run through, brought back. This is the thing. Dr. Ebersol waited like a man that was starving for a meal. As soon as I brought them in, he grabbed them, threw them up there and examined them. And then they went into their big conference, and and then he would say, okay, take the next set.
Approximately how much time was there between the time that you left the morgue and you returned with the developed X-rays?
Well, now this is an estimation. I'd have to say half an hour at the most. Because I had to get on the elevator, go up to the first floor, walk down the corridor, go down to the other, past the rotunda, down to the other elevator, and go up to the fourth floor, take the films. Processing at that time was 5 minutes. Now it's a matter of a minute and a half. At that time it was an old Payco unit where it was about 6 foot, I'd say 10 foot long, and it took a lot longer to develop.
Were all of the 5 skull X-rays taken at that first time, or was those actually 2 different series?
No, all of them were taken at that time.
By the time that you left the morgue on the time with the X-rays in hand, had you seen any photographers taking pictures by that time?
No, not really. You mean photographers outside the morgue?
No, totally inside the morgue.
They were, like I said before, they were taking pictures all the time. Even when I walked away, Floyd would come over and take films, and then come back off, and come in, take films, back off. It was a constant thing.
Okay. When you came back, were you asked for any opinions on the results of the skull X-rays?
On the contrary, I was told to keep my mouth shut. I gave my opinions, and I was told it's not my job. You're here to take X-rays only.
Do the X-rays of the skull show any significant amount of brain tissue?
To the best of my recollection, I don't remember seeing any.
What were you next asked to do?
Take pictures of the neck, then take pictures of the shoulder areas, the chest area, thoracic areas, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, the pelvis.
How many exposures were in the next series that you took?
Oh, I'd have to estimate. Yeah. 2, 3, 4, 5. Say 5 or 6, maybe more. There was a total of about anywhere from 14 to 20 films.
That's total for...
Yeah, total for the whole night.
Okay. But your estimate would be on the second series there were approximately 4 or 5.
Right.
Is that right?
He wanted to not go too far. Just to shoot some films, run them up, bring them back, examine them. Shoot some more films, run them up, bring them back. And you got to remember, I was limited to what I had. I only had a certain amount of films there.
So approximately how much time passed between the time that you returned with the first series of skull X-rays and you then began taking the second series of neck and...
Well, long enough for them to discuss the films that they had. Was 15, 20 minutes, half hour, somewhere around there.
And then
that's a crude estimate.
Sure, understood. Then approximately how long until you returned with the developed second series of X-rays?
Approximately about the same time.
Okay. And then what was the next series of X-rays that you took?
Like I said, I took some spine films, thoracic spine, lumbar spine, and I ran them up, brought them back. And I took some pictures of the pelvis and a few of the lower extremities, and that's when I stopped them. I said, it's ridiculous to go any further. He's not going to be shot in his leg. And he agreed with me, and I stood there. But you got to remember, at this time, each one of these trips, there was a lot more conversation going on. There was a lot more interference going on. So it stretched out. I was there for a good while.
Okay. Did you and Mr. Reed ever go develop films separately, or were you together?
Always together.
Previously in the deposition, we talked about Exhibit 202, which was a photograph that you brought with you.
Correct.
I'd like to show you another exhibit marked 208 that has another photograph. I'd like you to look at the one on the right.
This is the one that I forgot to bring.
Okay.
All right, this was what I told you was taken through the keyhole.
Okay.
See who's carrying the aprons, don't you?
Why don't you tell us for the record?
The student.
That's Mr. Reed?
That's Mr. Reed. He's definitely carrying the apron.
And he's the one in the center, is that correct?
Correct. It's part of the military protocol. When I was a student, I did the work. And he's a student, he does the dirty work.
Can you identify the person on the left?
That better be me.
All right. And
that's an ear right in the middle of my chest. All right, this is...
on the far right, the person is...
That's Marine Guard that was here at the time.
Okay.
I don't know why he took his hat off, but he was there.
Can you see the picture on the left?
Yes, I was just looking at that, and that's hard to tell what that is, or when that was taken. I don't remember seeing that.
Okay, why don't we take a break for lunch, and then we'll come back.
Sounds good to me.
Well, we're on the record now. Lovely luncheon.
Mr. Custer, just before our break, we were looking at the photograph that is at exhibit number 208. I just had one follow-up question regarding you and Mr. Reed. Could you tell me what your rank was at that time?
As an E4.
E4?
E4.
And what was the rank of Mr. Reed?
E4 also.
Okay. Off the record? Off the record. The record. We're on the record. Mr. Custer, we're going to show you now X-ray number 1, which has been identified in the 1966 inspection as the anterior-posterior view of the skull, slightly heat damaged. My first question to you, Mr. Custer, is whether you can identify that as an autopsy X-ray that you took.
Definitely an autopsy film.
If you could let me finish the question. Can you identify that as an autopsy X-ray that you took on the night of November 22nd, 23rd, 1963?
Yes, sir. Correct.
How can you identify that as being one that you took?
Bullet fragment, right orbital ridge, fragments throughout the temporal region. Remember how I stated, looked like somebody had sawed a portion over here.
You're referring to the
mid-sagittal plane.
Okay.
This?
Yes, now you're pointing to what looks like a
marker.
A marker.
It's my personal marker. See the opening? That shows the plane the film was taken. It's off to the side.
Now let me just say for the marker that appears when we are looking at the X-ray from the front, that is on the bottom right near the, what would be the left.
Left.
That's on the bottom right in the way that we are looking at it, to the left of the victim. Is that correct?
This is correct. Whenever you look at a film, it's right to left, left to right. Yes, you're correct.
Is there anything else that you can identify with this X-ray that helps you determine that it's an X-ray that you took on the night of November 22nd?
I remember this marker.
When you say that marker, what are you referring to?
It's a label. U.S. Naval Hospital, Bethesda, Maryland.
So that's writing that appears, again, as we are looking at it from the front, along the right margin.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Earlier in your deposition, you referred to some heat damage on one of the X-rays. Do you see any heat damage on this X-ray?
Right here. You can see it. This is where Dr. Ebersol got it too close to the heat lamp. Stated to him twice, please do not put it too close. You can see where it started to curdle, literally. And here it started to burn. And isn't it funny how where it starts to burn is the area that I suggested was an entry wound.
Now, are you certain that heat damage took place on this X-ray on the night of November 22nd?
Yes, sir. I was there and I saw him do it.
Can you identify in the X-ray any brain shadow?
No, there's no brain shadow that I can see. Maybe portion, very small, but this is all empty. But anything...
But, if I make this to the record, when you say this is empty, you're pointing to the left side as we are looking at it, which is the right hemisphere.
Correct.
Anatomically.
That doesn't set right with me. And if you're going to put it in a record like that, it's based, the damage It should be the damage is on the right side.
The anatomical right.
Anatomical right.
That's fine. Let's just continue to refer to it anatomically.
Okay. So here's another thing, too, that shows basically this is possible. More than likely, I'd say 80 to 90% entry wound. See this air down through the sinus area, maxillary sinuses? The only way you get air through the maxillary sinuses is when you have damage to the orbital ridge and the orbital base. Air gets down into the sinuses. Sinuses are right here in the front of the face, on both cheekbones. Your eye orbit sits back in. If you ever have any damage, you get punched in the eye. A lot of times, if this fractures the orbital ridge, you get an opening that communicates between the sinus and the eye. And this is why a lot of times they'll take sinus films on a damaged frontal area. And if you see blood or fluid in there, this is where they'll say you have an orbital fracture.
So where you have
Orbital fracture.
Orbital fracture.
Earlier you pointed to what I'm going to call the half circle that appears to be the lightest part of the film, and you referred to that as a bullet fragment?
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right? Where was that bullet fragment located? Now let me withdraw that question and ask another question. Do you know where the bullet fragment was located on the body?
Right orbital ridge. Superior.
How do you know that it was in the right orbital ridge rather than at the back of the skull?
Because of the protruding eyeball.
Did you see the fragment removed?
No, I did not. Can I inject something here?
Sure.
This area, I pointed out to Dr. Ebersol as a fragment, and he called it an artifact. I said, how about these fragments up here? This is when he told me to mind my own business. You can see where the skull has been fractured. This is all air through here. What I was going to say before.
But I'm just when you say through here again, that won't be clear on the record. You're referring to the
anatomical position of the right side, where bone has separated completely, and this all fills up through air on the right anatomical or aspect of the skull. Another reason where you have blackness in the right defect above the right orbit is when all the tissue is gone and there's nothing to stop the penetrating rays. So, of course, everything gets through. See the difference here? You have bone.
Now you're referring to the
anatomical left side. No bone here. You can see a decent density here on the left side. Anatomical left side. The anatomical right side is all blackened in, which shows there is no tissue, no bone, no nothing. But this is important right here. There's air in the maxillary sinuses. Extremely important on the right anatomical side. Extremely important. This is why I don't understand people didn't see this. And look, here's another thing. Let me bring this up. Look at all the fractures over here. Look at all this.
On the right side.
On the right side, right anatomical position. All the fractures are here, and then it gradually snakes out to the left anatomical side. This is where all the trauma was, right here.
And you're referring again to the right
Right
side.
anatomical side again. If there was trauma over on the left anatomical side, this would all be gone. And then you'd have fractures snaking out into the right anatomical side. Now these guys are experts, but I have 28 years of experience as an X-ray technician. And common sense.
Previously in the deposition, you said that there were metal fragments in the cervical spine, are you able to identify any cervical spine fragments, or is the picture too
Not
fine?
in this projection.
Okay.
The only part of the cervical spine I can identify is C2. That is the part the skull rotates on. We want to get further down.
No, I understand. Okay, could we now look at the... Oh, if I could ask another couple of questions. Sorry. Are you able to identify what kind of X-ray film that is?
Well, it's 10 by 12 cassette, radiographic cassette and film. I would say it would be a medium par speed.
Sorry, medium.
Medium par speed. PAR.
Can you identify any edge markings?
No, that's just aluminized. That's the screens.
So that
And then it has a serial number there. That doesn't tell what type of film it is.
that tells what kind of cassette the
Right.
film was in. Is that correct?
That's all.
Do you know what kind of film was used in the Bethesda radiology lab at that time?
At that time, at that year, it has to be a par speed screen because the technological advancements weren't for the faster speeds at that time.
Is there any question in your mind whether the X-ray that's in front of you now is the original X-ray taken at?
No question.
And the answer
It is the original film.
is par speed the speed of film or a brand name?
The speed of film.
Do you know a brand name for the?
Kodak, probably. More likely it was Kodak.
Do you know whether Kodak marked its X-ray film with a brand name on the edges of the film?
During that early part of the year, no, they didn't. It was basically on the boxes that they shipped them to you. Now they do.
Okay. Look at number 2 now, please, which was identified in the 1966 inventory as a right lateral view of the skull with 2 angle lines overdrawn on the film. Please.
Thank you for listening to episode 74 of JFK, The Enduring Secret. Welcome to JFK and The Enduring Secret. I'm your host, Jeff Crudell. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today's episode is episode 75. I know. Episodes 72, 73, and 74 were all detail wanders into the Gerald Custer testimony. I broke my promise to you. I said that I was going to edit down this 3.5-hour testimony into something more manageable. Well, I started to do that in episode 72, and I took out an opening discussion on documents that Custer brought with him to the deposition. Then I stopped, and then I just decided that you needed to listen to it all. I should have said something right then and there, but I let it go. My good friend Chris Schott, who listens to the podcast, texted me the other day and asked, rather succinctly as he always does, what am I listening for in this deposition? I suspect that a number of you are saying the same thing. So let me provide some quick direction as to where we are going in order to finish this wander. We have 2 more full-length episodes where we provide the remainder of Custer's testimony. That includes this episode 75 and then episode 76. I know we're getting into the holiday season, and it might be difficult for everybody to invest the additional time in listening to this fascinating detail. So I want to give you an option. If you feel like you want to speed up the process and get to the point of it all, you can just skip to episode 77, where I summarize in detail all the more relevant points that are contained in the 3.5 hours of Custer's testimony. I consider this audio interview to be one of the most critical interviews to listen to that is available. In order to prepare for episode 77, I listened to all 3.5 hours of this tape all the way through 4 times. And then I listened again to other sections of it in detail on other occasions. It's a goldmine of important points for all of us as jurors to listen closely to, if you have the time and you can. Well, that's why I'm the podcaster and you're the listener. So again, just to reiterate, we are going to go the distance with the rest of Custer's deposition, and the remainder of it is in this episode 75 and in the episode which follows, which is episode 76. Then, in episode 77, I summarize the whole thing for you along with my personal observations of this testimony. You will begin to hear from Dr. John Ebersol starting in episode 78. Ebersol was the radiologist on call the night of the autopsy. It was Custer's superior who was present that night and the next day. So, without further ado, let's listen to episode 75 of JFK, The Enduring Secret.
Back on the record?
Ready?
Yes, sir, Mark.
You want to repeat the question?
Question is, Mr. Custer, can you identify the film that is in front of you now as having been taken by you on the night of the autopsy of President Kennedy?
Correct. Yes, sir, I do.
And how are you able to identify that as being?
My marker in the lower mandibular joint.
And that, could you describe the marker to me, please?
Actually, all it is a metal, piece of metal, about 0.5 centimeter thickness, less than that, and about 2 inches long, with numerous dots going from left to right.
Is that a standard device for radiologists, or was that your own?
That was my own device.
So it was unique as far as you know?
Correct. And this, again, the only reason why I put that on there is for my own basic identification, plus to show the rotation.
Are you able to identify, by looking at this, whether we are looking at the anatomical right side of the body, whether the right side of the body is closer to the X-ray equipment, or whether the left side of the body is?
I can identify it as being the right anatomical body because of the enormous defect. When you have the defect closer to the film, it's more detailed. You can see the lines as you go around a lot better. See how clear it is here? And let me inject something else. Dr. Ebersol kept going back to the quality of the film. The quality of film did not depend upon the portable film, the portable X-rays being exposed at the time. The quality of the film depended upon the type of film speed you used. And at that time, in that year, this was the film speed that was used. And this was recognized, and people accepted it as such.
When you say doctor, when you're referring to something that Dr. Ebersol said, are you referring to his testimony before the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay.
Remember also, I had stated how a portion of the skull had lifted up and pushed backwards?
Yes.
Showing that there had to be a force impact this way and that way. Well, look, let me inject something else. From the right side, you notice, you see the fragmentation, how it starts to get larger and larger and larger. You have equal and opposite force. Everything being pushed forward, the brain is being pushed back, and it pops the skull out.
So it's your opinion that the trauma to the head began at the front and moved towards the back of the head?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. Is there anything else on this X-ray film that allows you to be certain that this was taken by you on the night of the autopsy?
Yes, sir. Not only the marker here, U.S. Naval Hospital, Bethesda, Maryland, on the right side of the film, but also, remember how I had stated to you about the sella turcica? The keystone of the sphenoid bone that holds the cranial vault. Look how prominent it is. And the only possible way you can see that, this is all gone. This is all defective in here on the right side. That makes that much more visible.
Are you able to identify any brain shadow in this lateral X-ray?
There is no brain shadow in this lateral X-ray at all. Look at the dark portion here. Dark through here. Now, there may be a minute amount, but not enough to make any gross difference. You don't see any markings here. Vascular markings. Where's your vascular markings? There is none. A normal brain has vascular markings. It will show.
I'd like to show you now exhibit number 206 we identified earlier in this deposition. Can you now, by looking at the original X-ray, compare that with the drawing that you made at 206? Let me know whether you would now amend the exhibit 206, or does that roughly correspond with the X-ray?
Okay, I would amend this somewhat.
How would
I would bring this down more into the temporal bone area.
You would add hash marks to the temporal bone area.
Right.
Okay.
But here, you got to remember too, this is only minute fragments of tissue maybe that are in there, but that more than likely could be on the posterior portion of the skull, on the left side of the skull, brain tissue. But you still see the defect here. And here's the protruding portion of the skull. And then you have an opening here also. So it's basically pretty close.
That is the X-ray to your drawing.
Right. It's basically pretty close, except I would bring the temporal down a little bit more.
When we take that X-ray off, I'm going to ask you to draw onto 206 to where you would think that it would be, but you not take that line.
No, this would come down.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you can draw the lines at perpendicular angles to the other, so it will be clear to the reader which lines. Yes.
It will come down to here.
Okay, so now the perpendicular lines are the ones that you would add after examining the original.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. If we could look at number... Oh, if we can have that back, I'm sorry. Mr. Custer, I'd like to draw your attention to what appear to be very thin, straight lines that come at an angle on the X-ray, and ask you if you can identify what those are. This is again on X-ray number 2.
Okay, I know exactly what they are. This is Eversol's little scratches. This is what he was trying to say was entry 1 here. I remember that now. This is where he drew.
Did you see Mr. Ebersol draw those lines yourself?
On the first set of films I brought back, he put them up and he had a ruler there and he was penciling it in. And this is when he got a comment. Don't do that. And this came from the gallery.
So did you hear Mr. Ebersol identify the fulcrum of those lines as being the entrance wound?
Yes.
Did any other doctor there make any comment on what Mr. Ebersol had said or done?
I can't remember, basically. I just remember with a comment was made from the gallery, and it shut everything down.
So as far as you are aware, those lines are made with a pencil?
As far as I'm aware.
We now examine number 3, which is identified as the lateral view of the skull.
Okay. This is the skull that I had taken. Same marker on the left side.
You're referring to the date and the
Naval Hospital. The date. Remember I had stated to you, this is the way the table was against the gallery. I could only get so close. There's my marker again.
And you're referring to the metal marker.
The metal apparatus in the mandibular region. And I cut the bottom portion of the skull off because I couldn't get low enough. Every time I put blankets underneath the head would actually get smaller.
Because it would be crushed.
Crushed.
By the weight.
Right. Due to the instability of the bones.
Fractures in the head.
Fractures in the head. But again, you see the big defects. But you don't see the subtestimony. That's good. See the fractures.
Are you able to identify any metal fragments in the head?
Sure.
You're pointing now to the
black area towards the top of the skull. Here. It's the only way they can be, this fragment. There's no way an artifact will show up like that.
Now, what is supporting those metal fragments if there's no brain in the cranium? Where are they resting?
They have to be resting on the bone itself. Somewhere. That's the only thing I can possibly think of. Unless there's enough tissue there in that region to hold them. That's the only possible thing that I can think of. Because here you go again. There's no brain here. It wouldn't be that dark.
You're referring to the dark
area.
On the first X-ray that we looked at, you identified a large metal fragment. Do you remember that? Semicircular?
Correct.
Can you identify the location of that fragment on this?
Not on this film.
What does that signify to you, if anything, the inability to identify the location of that metal fragment?
Could be too dark. This area is just too dark to identify.
Wouldn't the metal fragment still here even have greater contrast?
No.
Why is that?
Because you got to remember the central ray going through that body. It's hitting the film a lot faster. It's exposing it more. There were bone tissue on the AP projection which sort of backed off on the penetration. You have more penetration here. If you would take a photodensity of this picture and photodensity of that picture, this photodensity would be a lot greater.
But wouldn't a metal fragment still appear white on this?
If it is dark enough to burn it out, it'll burn it out. That's why when you take an abdomen film and you're looking for stones, stones will be burnt out, and that's bone.
Let me draw your attention to what appear to be some flecks in what I would say is above the right eye socket, and going towards the back. Are you able to identify whether those flecks are artifacts or metal fragments?
Metal fragments. Artifacts do not come in irregular form like this. not in that traveling projection like that. It just doesn't, not that many in that one area. You're going to have somebody just go in that one area and put artifacts all the way up and down this? It just doesn't happen. You get random artifacts. They have an artifact here, artifact here, artifact here, artifact here. And here's one thing too. If you look close, there is a faint image that could possibly be that fragment, but I can't attest to that.
Okay. When you say that fragment, you're referring to the one that we noticed with clarity in the first.
Correct. Absolutely.
X-ray. Do you have an opinion as to whether that is a right or left lateral?
That's the left lateral.
And what's the basis of that opinion?
What is the basis of that opinion? Because I couldn't get close enough to take a halfway decent film. And I knew that was the bad film, was the left lateral, due to my recollection.
So it's based upon recollection rather than observation of the X-ray? Which is fine, just know the basis of what you're saying.
Right.
And so it is from recollection?
Absolutely. Okay. Oh, let me add one thing too. Just noticed it. The difference in the size of the defect. With the defect on the film side, it becomes a little bit larger. This is a little bit smaller. That makes a difference. It's so hot in here.
Now, one thing I'd like to ask, just to make sure that we're clear here, is where you are locating the largest part of the wound. And if one were to think that either the occipital region towards the back or the parietal region more towards the front, as between those two, where are you identifying the larger wound?
The larger wound would have to be further back. This wasn't as bad towards the temporal region. It was open. But the more you went further back, the more destruction you had.
When you say the more destruction, is that consistent with what you were seeing with the X-ray films, where, by what I have been understanding you to say, most of the destruction is towards the front, where it's darker and where there's an apparent absence of bone?
No. Let me reiterate again. Most of the destruction was towards the occipital area. This area wasn't as bad. You still had the orbital ridge. The frontal forehead was still here. But the further back you got, the worse the destruction became. And the more gaping the hole became.
And so why is it that on the X-rays, and I'm saying this from my perspective as a layman, the film appears to be darker, more towards the front, and lighter towards the back?
In other words, you're asking me, why is this lighter here?
Why is it lighter and with the more apparent bone in the occipital region, and why is there apparently less bone in the frontal and parietal region?
If you look at your diagram that you have of the occipital area.
Let me get that out. You're referring to exhibit number 207?
All right. Look how far the occipital region comes off. Okay, this whole area, right back through here. This is all gone. This is all gone here from.
Okay, now you're pointing to the X-ray.
I see what we're. I'm getting confused here myself now. The occipital region is all down here, where my hands are. The portion that's cut off, straight through here. Here, let me see that over.
Now looking at exhibit number
206. From the temporal region just behind the right orbit, you can see this defect. All right?
And that is in temporal bone, is that correct?
Temporal bone. But it also comes out of the temporal bone and comes into the parietal. And you start to infringe just a little bit. The occipital region is right here. And you start to infringe on it right here. So this is all gone.
But you're still pointing to the parietal region. Parietal and temporal region.
See where the temporal stops. This is occipital back here. See, the occipital comes back to here. See how far up it comes?
Sure.
That's what I'm trying to say. You still have damage that starts to come into the occipital region. It may not go all the way down, but it's coming down into that area.
Sure. My question is not whether there is damage in the occipital region, but where is the majority of the bone missing? And is the majority
the majority of the bone is in the, it has to be the parietal. This is the parietal area right here.
So you see this x-ray as showing an absence of bone in the parietal region and showing damage, but presence of bone in the occipital region.
Correct.
Okay.
Plus you have absence of bone in this region right here.
In the temporal region.
Temporal region. Only a portion of the temporal region behind the right occipital, or the right orbital area.
Okay. We now look at, let me ask one question. Previously in the deposition, you had said that the skull x-rays were all taken in the first series. Is that correct?
Correct.
And would it be fair to say then that the x-rays 1 through 3 are those that you took in the first series?
You're missing two.
Just
yes, correct.
Yes for that one. Now, I can tell you that those are the 3 that you have just looked at are the only skull x-rays present at the archives. Are you aware of any other skull x-rays?
There should be at least 2 more.
And you described those both as oblique x-rays, is that correct?
Or, like you had stated, tangential.
Tangential. And are you certain that you took those other 2 x-rays on the night?
Absolutely.
The autopsy. Okay, could we go to number 4?
I know exactly what this is.
This is described in the 1966 inspection as x-ray of 3 fragments of bone with larger fragment containing metallic fragments. Mr. Custer, have you previously seen x-ray number 4?
Yes, I have.
When did you first see those x-rays?
The next morning, I took them.
And where did you take those x-rays?
In the main department in a private room with a portable x-ray unit.
Was it the same x-ray unit that was used to take the autopsy?
Yes, sir. The same distance.
And what was the purpose of taking these x-rays?
I was told by Dr. Ebersol that they were to be taken to make measurements to make a bust of President Kennedy.
What did you do when you took the x-rays? What were the procedures? How did you go about taking them?
All I did was place the bone fragments on the film, and I made different exposures at different distances.
Did Mr. Ebersol or Dr. Ebersol say anything to you about metal fragments?
He gave me 3 or 4 different metal fragments varying in size, and he asked me to take them to the bones.
Did you tape metal fragments to the bones?
Yes, sir.
What was the purpose that you understood taping metal fragments to the bones to be?
That was a good question because I didn't understand it at the time either.
Is there any question in your mind whether you in fact taped metal fragments to the bones?
Absolutely no question at all in my mind.
Do you see the results of those metal fragments appear appearing on X-ray number 4?
Only a few here.
And you're pointing to the largest fragment?
Largest fragment. The superior portion of it.
Approximately what time did you take the X-rays on the 23rd?
I'll have to estimate. Early morning, early afternoon. No, late morning, early afternoon.
Did Dr. Ebersol ever subsequently explain to you the purpose for taping metal fragments to the bones?
No, he didn't. He just stated to me when he brought the bone fragments and the metal fragments to me that he had just come back from the White House after being debriefed.
And what did he say about that debriefing?
Well, he just said that he was debriefed by the Secret Service, and that was it. High-ranking people had talked to him, and he suggested to me that everything that I see from now on, I should forget.
Did he say that to you at approximately the same time that you were working on X-raying the skull fragments?
Absolutely.
Do you know where the skull fragments came from?
They arrived supposedly that evening from Dallas.
When did you first hear that fragments had arrived from Dallas?
The night of the autopsy.
Did you see the fragments on the
No, I did not see the fragments. I just heard the conversation.
Other than the metal fragments that you taped to the skull fragments, did you identify any other metal fragments in the bone?
And the skull, the apicervical spine.
Let me withdraw the question.
Go ahead.
The question wasn't clear. With regard to taking the X-rays of the bone fragments that you have in front of you,
No.
were there any metal fragments that were in the bone outside of the taped fragments?
No.
So in other words, the X-ray appears as if there are metal fragments in the bone, whereas in fact that is all a construct of the way that the X-ray was taken. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct.
Okay. Could you look at, like you take just a quick look at X-ray number 5 and number 6, which are similar X-rays in terms of showing the bone fragments? Let me try asking you one question just to make sure that the record is clear on this. Did Dr. Ebersol ask you to tape the metal fragment to the bone after he had returned from the White House? Are you able to say with certainty?
Absolutely. As soon as he walked in, that's the first thing he said. I want these bone fragments X-rayed with metal fragments same. Okay, this is a different bone fragment. Same one, same one. You just added one to it, that's all.
I think maybe if you looked at the other one again for just a moment, you might see. We could look at number 4 again. You're identifying 3 bone fragments in X-ray number 5, is that correct?
Correct.
This is number 4 again.
Oh, I see it. All he did was just move them around.
When you say he, who is the he you were referring to?
No, I said me. Oh, all I did was move them around. That's all. Different exposures. See the difference?
Yeah.
Darker, lighter, darker, lighter.
And so you would say that X-ray number 5 was taken roughly at the same time as X-ray number 4?
Absolutely.
Can you look at number 6, please? That's a similar question.
Okay, that's better quality film.
Are you the person who took the X-ray of number 6?
Yes, sir.
Is there any marking on the film other than the fragments themselves that helps you identify that as being an X-ray that you yourself took?
No, sir.
Is there a reason that you did not use your metal marker? Doctor, let me finish the question and then answer it. Was there any reason that you did not use the metal marker that you had used in the previous X-rays?
Yes, because he saw it that night, and he knew it belonged to me, and he stated, I better not see it on these films.
That was Dr. Ebersol who said it?
Absolutely correct.
Did anyone else hear Dr. Ebersol say that?
No. Said only in my presence.
On the 23rd, when you took the X-rays of the skull fragments, was there any other person besides you and Dr. Ebersol present?
No.
You were about to say something else?
You sure the date? 23rd or 22nd?
If I said 22nd,
You said 23rd.
Yes, I'm referring to the time that you took the X-rays of these.
Oh, okay, fine.
Is that?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Could we look now at X-ray number 7, please? Should I sit down?
No, that's all right. Okay. You hear my back.
Mr. Custer, are you able to identify X-ray number 7?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell me what that is, please?
That was an upper portion of the abdomen taken on President Kennedy.
How were you able to identify that?
My U.S. naval marker.
That's the markings on the side.
On the left side.
The date and the name of the Naval Academy. Or, I'm sorry, the
Naval Hospital. U.S. Naval Hospital. Bethesda, Maryland.
Previously, you referred to your own unique marker. Do you see that anywhere on the X-ray?
Nope. I was caught again.
Did Dr. Ebersol ask you at any time on the night of the 22nd not to use that marker?
Yes.
When did he ask you not to use that?
When I took this film. He saw it and made me take it off.
Are you able to estimate or explain when you were able to use your own metal marking and when you were not able to use it?
On the skulls only.
Can you identify in the X-ray that you're looking at now, number 7, whether the internal organs are still present in the body?
There has to be colon because this is all fecal material. You can say it. Strong colon.
Other than the colon, are you able to identify any other internal organs that are still present?
Not really. There could be kidneys here, but it's obscured. It's obscuring. There's no way you can tell. For a man, President Kennedy's age, you shouldn't have these calcifications on the lower ribs.
Now, previously in the deposition, you referred to a contrast media dye. You recall that? In the lumbar spinal region?
You can just see portions of it here. Just a little bit of it right here.
And what vertebra is that you're pointing?
Okay, this is 12, 1, 2, L3, between L2 and 3. Can be a little here too. Here's his problem right here. You have problems here. This would be about 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
So you're referring to L4 and L5.
Right. You can see this is. You can see all the degenerative disease right through here. See how nice this space is?
You're referring to between L2 and L3.
L2 and L3, L4 and L5, nothing. Nothing. L3 and L4.
Could we now look at X-ray number 8, please?
Let me go back one thing.
Sure.
There are kidneys here. There's one here. Here's one here.
We go off the record for a moment. I hear your phone ringing. Mr. Custer, could we go back to X-ray number 2? If you recall, previously we were talking about 2 lines that are pointing towards the fulcrum.
Yes.
Could you identify where those lines lead to, and where you understand that Dr. Ebersol was trying, the point Dr. Ebersol was trying to identify?
They lead to the occipital region.
Is there a way that you can identify it more specifically than that? It's a little bit hard with this film.
It's kind of hard to say because here's the mastoid region, down near the external auditory meatus. Right. It would be, I'd have to say, just above and perpendicular to that region.
But it looks as if the fulcrum is coming close to where the outer skull is.
Correct.
So it's
like we had said before, this is the occipital region.
Are you able to identify the external occipital protuberance on this X-ray number 2?
It would have to be done through here.
This is far above the EOP, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. We could go now to X-ray number 8. Is that right? Mm-hmm. X-ray number 8 is described as the AP view of the right shoulder and right chest. Mr. Custer, are you able to identify X-ray number 8 as having been taken on the night of the autopsy?
Yes, sir, I can.
Once again, how is it that you're able to identify that?
By the marking. U.S. Naval Hospital, National Naval Medical Center. Date. And the right marker.
Okay, can you identify whether there are any lung shadows in this X-ray?
There are no lung shadows in that X-ray.
Does that tell you anything about whether the internal organs had been removed at the time that this X-ray was taken?
Absolutely, sir.
And it tells you what?
It means that when you have lungs in chest X-ray, you take an X-ray, you see pulmonary markings. You do not have a dark area like this. You come back to the same tissue, radiation, absorption effect. When radiation goes through tissue, it absorbs. It cuts back on the beam, therefore you don't get a full exposure on film.
Do you know why, or let me withdraw that, were you told why this X-ray was to be taken?
Same thing, bullet fragments.
Looking for a bullet fragment?
Correct.
Do you see any bullet fragments on the X-ray?
No, sir.
Could we turn now to X-ray number 10, please? Excuse me, X-ray number 9. Mr. Custer, are you able to identify X-ray number 9?
Yes, I am.
And how are you able to identify it?
My marker again, the left marker.
Previously, you referred to there being metal fragments in the cervical area. Are you able to identify any metal fragments in the
Not
cervical?
in this film.
Does this film include a view or an exposure that would have included such metal fragments?
No, sir.
Where would the metal fragments be located?
Further up in here. This region.
You're pointing to...
Up into the, I'd say C3, C4 region.
What is the highest, or the lowest C vertebra that you were able to identify there?
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, in that area there.
Are you able to determine... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Are you able to determine whether any of the internal organs had been removed prior to this?
I'm going to tell you right now, the heart is still there, and the lungs are still there.
In other words, it would be fair to say that X-ray number 9 was taken before X-ray number 8.
I had to have taken it before.
I'd like to point out some light
That's
fragments. you've identified them as artifacts, and in the anatomical left shoulder blade right below the scapula. How are you able to identify those as artifacts, please?
Because of the symmetrical size and the area that they're in. They're all in close proximity. Now let me show you something else about the processing film at that time. See the cast, different markings, that's chemicals. It didn't quite wash off. And that was from the old Paco units. See here? That's old fixer that didn't come off.
So that's all.
Old fixer.
So it appears to my eye as being a sort of a dingy brownish color.
Correct. That's from the acid in the fixer.
One moment, please.
Thank you for listening to episode 75 of JFK, The Enduring Secret.